I, for the life of me, cannot understand why the American Psychological Association would release guidelines for working with boys and men that don't center the male experience. This feels like it was written about men, but not for them. Hi, I'm Gabby, and when I was in college and in graduate school, I believed that the way that I was taught to understand the world led to me developing a very strong negative bias against boys and men. I was taught to view the world through a very specific framework. Men are privileged and women are oppressed. And it's true. Men do have privilege, and women do face systemic oppression. But it is not the full truth. It's also true that men face systemic oppression and women have societal privilege. Both of those things can be and are true. But when we look at the world through this very narrow lens where men are always privileged and women are always oppressed, something very dangerous happens. The pain of other groups is seen as more deserving of attention, and the struggles of boys and men get dismissed. So I think far too often, when people speak about gender issues, it quickly devolves into a game of who has it worse, men or women. And I think people click on my videos looking to get defensive, because most people who talk about gender are only trying to add more fuel to the fire of the gender war, and I am trying to figure out how we can put this fire out. Speaking about gender gets very contentious, because most people have a lot of pain beneath their views on gender. And when pain is at the center of the conversation, there is always a lot of room for grifting, emotional manipulation, and division. And I get comments all the time saying things like, I clicked on this video expecting to be upset, but I was actually pleasantly surprised. And I'm like, fantastic, because that's the exact emotional response that I'm going for. I believe that if we have a better framework, we can actually respect, acknowledge, and work toward correcting the systemic issues that women face and that men face. And that is really the only way that I think we're going to be able to resolve this growing rift that we see between men and women today. I am as pro-woman as I am pro-man, and that is exactly why I believe that saying men are oppressors and women are oppressed is an inaccurate way to characterize something as complicated as gender in society. The only way we're going to get closer to the truth is to acknowledge that multiple truths exist. And if we want our beliefs to reflect reality, we must be willing to see the ways that both men and women have been historically discriminated against and oppressed in society. By failing to acknowledge the full spectrum of gendered experiences, we've created a way of thinking about gender that does not center the male experience, even when we're speaking about the male experience. It sees men as the group who is responsible for everyone else's suffering, including their own. This perspective is not one that promotes any empathy or understanding. Nobody wants to root for the group that they believe to be responsible for their suffering and the suffering of vulnerable people. If you see one group as the abused and you see one group as the abusers, you're going to be a lot more willing to care about the group that is abused. There's a really common emotional justification for dismissing male pain, which is, well, men have been centered for all of history, and now it's everyone else's turn to be centered. That line of thinking is driven by resentment. And resentment-driven thinking, I really believe, has influenced academia, health literature, and gender studies. The attitude is often, men have had it so good for so long, and now it's our turn. And that has really influenced the way that we speak about men's issues. We discuss their problems through the lens of power, and we don't really stop to understand their unique experiences of oppression and victimization. I believe that this framework for understanding gender has directly contributed to the lack of care for male suffering that we see today. This way of thinking that lacks compassion and prioritizes critique over care is exactly what I see in these guidelines. And that is why I want to do a really deep, critical analysis of this document. This series of videos that I'm creating are going to be a bit of a workspace and a rough draft. I'm a woman, so I have a native understanding of the female experience. And that means that there are going to be things that I see and there are going to be things that I miss. And that is where you guys come in. I'm going to be working through this document like guideline by guideline, one video at a time, and each one is going to be a draft. Just me working and thinking through this in real time, and I invite you to follow along with me. And please feel so free to push back on me, because I want this analysis to be super airtight, because it is really bringing out my mama bear. I do not like the way that it frames male suffering. This project is going to be an evolving dialogue between me and anyone who wants to help me. And I think that if we all work together, this could turn into something really meaningful. Once I've gone through all of the guidelines and have a really good, clear argument, I'm going to be compiling everything into one final polished video. And if you contribute, I am so happy to include your name in the credits if you would like me to. And who knows, maybe we could influence the next set of guidelines for working with boys and men. It is 2025. A lot of weird stuff happens. I believe that we have to change the way that we talk about gender. And I also believe that truth, empathy, and nuance are going to be our only way forward. So, let's get started. I've created a series of 7 analytical lenses that we are going to be using as a measuring stick to determine whether or not this document actually helps boys and men, or if it just reinforces the same ideologically driven, shame-based thinking that has already failed them. And you know what? This is actually a really good opportunity for a theme. Is a trauma and attachment-informed humanistic lens being used? Or are we using a lens that pathologizes, minimizes, or blames men for their suffering? Does it acknowledge the present and historical systems that have failed and continue to fail our boys and men? Or does it mostly ignore how our systems and institutions have neglected, abandoned, and traumatized them? Does it offer a clear and empowering model of masculinity, or does it deconstruct traditional masculinity without giving a new model for boys and men to strive toward? Does it acknowledge masculinity as a biologically influenced, meaningful aspect of male identity, or does it reduce it to a social construct that should be unlearned? Stick with me on this one. Does it recognize masculine aggression as a functional and adaptive force, or does it imply that all masculine aggression is harmful? Are we seeing men as people or as problems? Are we using a lens that sees men primarily as holders of privilege and systemic power, or one that sees them as humans who are worthy of our time, understanding, attention, and care? I've created these lenses as a tool to help us recognize the degree to which literature is skewed anti-male. These lenses are going to help us make sure that boys and men are being spoken about as humans first. Because if we're not doing that, then what the hell are we even doing? Boys and men deserve better, and I believe that if we move forward with compassion, curiosity, and nuance, we can do better for them. I'll see you next week.